Those that are joining us online from home, are we live? The online, are they live? Okay, welcome guys at home, and thank you so much all for coming out here on this gorgeous Sunday. Isn't it nice to have sunshine again after a week of crazy weather? Sure, Brent, what you brought, I might as well not even stand here this morning. I feel if God was trying to speak his messages loud and clear to all present, and I hope that this morning's message, which I feel follows on from that worship that we've had, will really touch your hearts and leave you challenged. I've got a 4-year-old son. I've got a 4-year-old son and an 8-year-old daughter, and my 4-year-old son has got this new catchphrase, a phrase that he uses. And maybe some of you have heard your kids say the same, or maybe some of you have used this. His new catchphrase is, "Mom, how unfair is that?" Does anyone relate? And I think he learned it from his sister, because Laura will also be like, "That's not fair." Like just yesterday, she was telling me about how, she was telling me how unfair I was, because on the way out of Checkers, I wouldn't get her a milkshake. And that makes me the worst parent in the world, apparently. Very unfair. And so the kids learn how to say unfair. Anyone's children relate, or is it just mine and my bad parenting? Okay, all right. And where do you suppose my kids learned it from? My husband, you're right, absolutely 500%. No, you know where they learned it from? Me, because you know how often, Fricky, what's my catchphrase? Love, you know what's really not fair? And I can physically hear him groan from the other room because he knows, here comes a moan, because it'll be something like, you know what's not fair is I did supper and I'm having to do the dishes tonight. Or you know what's not fair is this and that. Or you know what's not fair, this happened at work. Or you know what's not fair, that happened at the shop. Can anyone relate, or am I on my own today? Anyone ever get that feeling? No, we all learned it from you, remember? But the feeling of kids, kids have got this like inherent instinctive, I suppose it's human nature. Nobody pulls you aside and goes, this is what's fair and this isn't what's fair. And yet somehow my 4-year-old son can pick up when he feels a situation is unfair. When we were raised, I'm one of 3 daughters, and my parents were tremendously fair to each of us. Like my mom's policy was, if she spent 100 Rand, let's say for Christmas, if she spent 100 Rand on this daughter's gift, the other daughter's gifts had to amount to the same. It had to be fair. Do you all understand? Everyone feel the same? I struggle sometimes with my kids. I physically have to remind myself, hey, you bought this one something, you better buy that one something. So it's not something that naturally comes to me. But I've noticed even my cousin, if she's buying, she's also got 3 kids. If she buys one child something, the other children have to get something as well, because what you do for one, you do for the other, and vice versa. And so I feel that we grow up with this inherent feeling, particularly from childhood, that life has to be fair. Things have to be fairly dealt out. If you see it happening here, it should happen here for you as well, right? And then I feel like adulthood hits us, and the reality of life comes flooding in. And there's those moments where in childhood, yes, me and my siblings, we had it all fair. But then there's moments in life, as you get older, that you realize society isn't fair. School isn't fair. Employment isn't always fair. Life in general isn't fair. And God is not fair. You're like, what? Can't say that. That's not true. How dare you say that from the pulpit? And that's what I want to focus on this morning. This morning's message is called Just Not Fair. And I want us to change our perception of what fairness is this morning. Has anyone ever found themselves in a situation where they've questioned either out loud or in their hearts and gone, God, that just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem fair. I wasn't going to say this, but I'm going to. The inspiration for this message was a few weeks ago. A friend of ours, a few of us here in the church, for 18 months, she fought cancer, and she fought like an absolute warrior, and she beat cancer. She'd just gotten the all clear. And 2 weeks ago, we woke up to the news that she passed away from a sudden heart attack. And we were going, that's not fair. I was speaking to her sister, and her sister said to me, she's like, Charles, we did everything right. We took her to chemo. We did the right stuff. She followed the right diet. She fought the battle. Where's the fairness in this? And unfortunately, as much as children might complain, oh, this isn't fair because my sibling got a milkshake and I didn't, or my brother or sister that, the reality is in life, as we get older, there's going to be those moments where it's not just petty things that we go, oh, that's not fair. There's going to be those core moments that can shake us to the very core of our faith where we go, that's not fair. God, is that fair? Is that right? That doesn't seem right. And it's in those moments that we have the opportunity where we can either give up and turn our backs on God, or we can throw ourselves wholeheartedly into who He is and who He has called us to be. And that's the option that I'm hoping we will follow this morning. Because in the real world, life is not fair like it is for the children. In fact, you will not find the Bible ever saying that God is fair. In Psalm 25, verse 8, you don't have to put that one up yet, in the Message version, the message starts off saying God is fair. But if you go back to the original translations that came out of the Greek and Hebrew, the old King James, and you go to the Strong's Concordance, you will never find the word fair used in the context that we use it today. The word fair is in the Bible, but it's used to denote something that is beautiful or attractive, like this was a fair lady or a fair day or a fair field or whatever, something beautiful, not in the context that we use it where everyone gets treated equally and all the treatment is the same. Because the Bible never once says that God is fair. What it does say, however, is that God is just. And that's why this morning's message is called Just Not Fair. You can either read that as going just not fair or just not fair. And that's what we're going to be focusing on this morning. You see, the trouble with the word fairness that we believe is that us as humans have put it into context. We've decided what fairness is, and in terms of our mind, if God is fair, then He follows my expectations, right? So I've got a little illustration. There were 4 gentlemen that I asked if they would come and help me this morning. Brent, Colin, Fricky, and Chris, if you guys don't mind. You can just stand at the front here and face the audience. Right, now that dance that you guys prepared on the count of 3. So this is an illustration that I saw on Facebook. It's totally not mine, and if you have kids or if you're a teacher, you might want to use this in your class. Whoopsie. Sorry, won't you pick that up for me, my love? Thanks. And it basically goes like this. So Brent, you fall down and you scratch your elbow, and your elbow is bleeding. All right, so that's the part of you that's hurt. Which part of you is hurt?
My elbow.
Your elbow. So here's a plaster. Please put it on your elbow.
Cool.
Right? Colin, you fall down. You scrape your finger. Which part of you is bleeding?
My finger.
Your finger. Right, here's a plaster. Please put it on your elbow. Right. Fricky, you fall down. You scrape your chin. Which part of you is bleeding?
My chin.
Your chin. Here's a plaster. Please put it on your elbow. Chris, you ready to roll those pants up?
Yeah.
Because you fall down, you scrape your knee. Which part of you is bleeding?
My knee.
Your knee. Here's a plaster. Please put it on your elbow. Have we done?
This is higher.
It's a higher grade. Higher grade. Just stick it somewhere. There we go. All right.
Oh, that's bad.
Terrible illustration, but do you see where we're going with this? Okay, actually what we're illustrating here is that guys clearly can't put plasters on. All right. That's why they always come to the moms. All right. So Brent had hurt his elbow. He got a plaster on his elbow. Colin had hurt his finger. He got a plaster where? On his elbow. Fricky had hurt his face. Where did he get a plaster? On his elbow. Chris had hurt his. He gets a plaster where? On his elbow. But I've treated them all fairly, right? I've given them all the same treatments and told them to use it in the same way. That's fair. But do you think these 3 gentlemen here would be very happy with their treatment? Not at all. Because often when we're thinking fair with shame, thanks, you guys can sit down. Sorry. I hope I didn't tell you to stick it anywhere hairy. That's going to hurt when you pull it off later. Also waxing. But do you follow that illustration? As simple as it is, I saw that a teacher put that on Facebook. She's like, you want to explain to the kids in your class what fairness looks like? Do that illustration. I gave you each the same treatment, the exact same treatment. I told you to use it in the same way. That's what fairness is, right? So-and-so gets that, I want that. You saw this over there. You saw God doing this for that person. I want God to do this for me. And that's the whole premise of the prosperity gospel. You know, you get these preachers that stand there and be like, God blessed me with a new BMW. He can do the same for you, just with your gift of so much a month. And yeah, I'm not saying God wouldn't bless you. Calling or the path that he's put you on. So our version of fairness, the one that we want, ultimately isn't always fair in the bigger picture of God. Because as a child, I could go, well, my brother got a plaster for his elbow. I want a plaster for my elbow. And my mom's going, no, but your knee is bleeding. I don't care. I want one on my elbow because that's what my brother got. Do you understand why the human concept of fairness can be so warped and unfair just in the way that we practice it? Is this making sense this morning? All right. Because what I did for these three guys was all technically fair, but at the end of the day, it was only to the benefit of one, the one that I had originally helped and given it to. The other three weren't benefited at all. I treated them fairly, but they didn't get the benefits. They didn't find the happiness and the fulfillment in my instruction to them simply because it was a carbon copy of my instruction to Brent. You following? Is this okay? Okay. Mosques make it very difficult to gauge. I'm like, oh, people looking at the clock. You see, in order for us to truly make sense of the life that we're living in and the times that we live in, we need to change our understanding of the fairness of God. That Bible verse that the Message translates and says, God is fair, in the original King James, Psalm 25, verses 8 to 14 says this, and I've got it up on the screen. It says, good and upright is the Lord. You see why I think that message and the song we were singing is just so amazing. Good and upright is the Lord. Therefore, he teaches sinners in the way. The humble he guides in justice, and the humble he teaches his way. All the paths of the Lord are mercy and truth to such as keep his covenant and his testimonies. You see, the Bible doesn't say God is fair. It says he is good and he is right. And other verses will tell you that he is just. Just and fairness, although we might use them interchangeably, fairness is more like, well, if I do for one, I'll do for the other. Just means I'm not going to give you the same treatment. I'm going to give you what you need for the journey I have put you on. That is the true fairness and the true justice of God. God is a good God. I don't know if any of you have ever read the children's book by C.S. Lewis, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Anyone read it? And in the book, the whole book is actually an analogy for the story of Christ. And in the book, you've got Aslan, the lion. And the beavers are going to go and lead the children to meet Aslan. And all along, the children have heard the name Aslan, 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 Aslan. And they've assumed it was a person. And when they find out it's a lion, they're a little bit taken back. And one of the children says to Mr. Beaver, he goes, is Aslan a lion? And he's like, yes, yeah, he's a lion. He goes, well, is he safe? He said, of course he's not safe. He's a lion, but he's good. Did that hit home? Of course he's not safe. He's not tameable, but he's good. Our God is not one who fits into our expectations of him. He's not tameable. He's not a safe God, but he is a good God. And when we walk in his ways, we walk in his goodness, in his mercy, in his truth. That Bible verse, Psalm 25, notice what it says. It says, all the paths of the Lord are mercy and truth. In other words, he's painting a picture, and each of us have got a unique and different part to play in that story. My path isn't going to necessarily look like your path, and your path might look very different to someone else's path, which means when we're on our different paths, we're going to expect to receive different treatment from God along the way. He's going to give us what we need for the path that we're on. He's not going to give us what somebody else needs for their path. There's one of the 10 commandments that Moses was given was, thou shalt not covet. And coveting is the epitome of jealousy. It's when you look at what you have, and then you look at what your neighbor has, and you go, God, that's not fair. Look at what I got, but they got that. I want that, Lord. And actually, God's going, no, I've given you what you need in this time for you to bring my name glory. What if the situation that you may be battling with, what if any time you've wondered if God is really fair, what if that seeming unfairness is the stepping stone that is bringing you one step closer to the glory of God? Think about every single Bible character that we've ever read about. Everyone. I guarantee that they could easily have turned around and gone, this isn't fair. Look at the situation I'm in. God, what have I done to deserve this? This isn't fair. I mean, think about Joseph. You know, Joseph and his technicolored coat. Joseph was Jacob's son. And he was favored by Jacob. Jacob preferred Joseph over the other. Were there 12 brothers or 11 brothers? 12 brothers. And he favored him over everyone else. It wasn't his fault that his father liked him most, but his brothers didn't like him because of that. Anybody ever faced, and don't put your hands up because you're bound to start a family feud. Anyone ever faced an unfair situation within their families? No, I said, don't put your hands up. Yes, me. Even within families, we face this unfairness. Joseph, if anyone had ever a right to claim his life was a little bit unfair, his own brothers didn't like him. And not only did they not like him, they sold him into slavery, as older brothers usually do, right? I mean, that's not just like sibling rivalry, that's like intense hatred. And Joseph gets sold into slavery. He goes from being the apple of his father's eye to finding himself in a ditch and sold off to slave traders. Then in that, he finds himself in Potiphar's household, and things start to look better. He's like, okay, all right, I can do this. And he becomes a trusted member of the household. And then Potiphar's wife accuses him unfairly of a crime, and he finds himself in prison. And then while in prison, he gains the trust there because he's a man of God. And so even in those unfair times, he keeps bringing glory to the name of God. He finds himself in the prison, and he finds himself, favored by the prison wardens and whatever. And he's able to help two prisoners, the baker and the wine taster, the cupbearer. And in his helping them, he says to them, remember me when you go back to, he says to the cupbearer, remember me when you go back to Pharaoh's household. And the cupbearer gets out of prison and forgets all about him. How unfair is that? And over and over and over again in Scripture, we read about these unfair situations. You've got Moses in the bulrushes. I mean, how unfair is that? From the time he's a child, he's basically rejected and cast off by his family. Then God calls him to be a spokesman, but you know, Moses actually wasn't very good at speaking. The Bible says, he says he's not eloquent, and historians seem to believe that he was a stutterer. So here he is, God goes, I want you to go and tell Pharaoh this. And he's like, I can't speak. How unfair is that? I'm the wrong guy for this job. What about someone like Ruth? Ruth, who was widowed, a loving husband, and she lost him. And her life got considerably hard for a while after that. How unfair is that? Yet we read their stories. And I mean, you can think of anyone. Think about David even. David, who was just a little shepherd boy. There's an entire army that could have taken Goliath out. How unfair that it fell on his shoulders. And how unfair that later on Saul had it in for him and repeatedly tried to kill David. How unfair. Yet we can look at those stories now, and with the gift of perspective, we can look at them and go, oh, but of course those events had to happen in order for it to all tie together and fall together in the story of God leading up to Christ on the cross. We can see it now because we are 2,000 odd years later and their stories have been done. But what about our stories today? Do you realize the situation you're in right now that might seem grossly unfair? The things you are facing, the questions you are asking God, the times that you are doubting, and there are times. And it's okay to doubt, and it's okay, how do I put this? It's okay to question, it's okay to have those questions, provided they don't drive a wedge between you and God, provided they draw you closer into His arms. Let those times where you have got no idea what's happening be those times that you cling the closest to the Father, because you know that He knows and He's in control and He's good and He is merciful. It's not about our expectations and what we think is fair. It's about God giving us gifts, giving us obstacles, giving us stepping stones that draw us into the journey He has planned for our lives. Who knows, 2,000 years from now, I don't know, maybe we get to heaven and it's like a replay, like maybe there'll be a big movie night and we'll all sit watching our stories and we'll go, oh, That's how that tied in. It made absolutely no sense at the time, but I didn't get it. But when this happened to me, it was actually a knock-on event, like a domino event. And that, while this was happening here and I was worried, that was happening there and God was working things together. And look at how the part that I had that felt so difficult at the time, look at how that affected the story of God and brought His name glory and brought His kingdom to earth. Do you follow what I'm saying? We need to understand and we need to trust that even in the most difficult times, the times we are so uncertain and unsure, our God is still good. He is still merciful. He is still just, and He is still in control, even when the world seems like it's not. Right now, this week, all of a sudden, I don't know if anybody else here feels a bit hard done by. I feel like South Africa is being punished because we were transparent about a virus variant. And we're like, we just happen to see it. Who says it's nowhere else? How unfair is it that the world is shutting us out? How unfair. And this has ruined my plans for this. Or this has really made me feel like this. And we might all be battling with this in our own way at this time. But maybe, just maybe, in this horrible, unfair situation, God is still working. And maybe, just maybe, the solution for COVID will come out of the faith of the people in South Africa, and it will affect the world. I've completely gone off my notes. I apologize. God is not fair in the way that we think fairness should be meted out. And thank goodness He isn't. In Matthew chapter 20, Jesus tells the story of a parable. He tells a parable of a vineyard owner, a land owner who goes to, like, I don't know what you would call it, like the labor area. You know how you'll get the guys that gather in certain spots, and if you need a laborer for the day, you can drive up there and get a few guys, casual labor. So it speaks about how there's this vineyard owner who needs some laborers for the day. So he sets off early in the morning, goes to the spot, gets some workers and says to them, guys, come work for me for the day. I'm going to pay you a denarius for the day. And they were all like, that's cool. We're down for that. We want to go work. So off they go and they work. The third hour of the day, the landowner goes back and he gets some more people from the same pool of laborers waiting to be employed. So he goes and gets some more people. The 6th hour and the 9th hour, he does the same. He goes to this area and he gets guys to come and work in his field. And then it tells us that at the 11th hour of the day, he's going past this area again, and there are still workers there that haven't yet found work for the day. And so he goes up to them and he says, come work in my field. And so they do. And then it gets to pay time, all right? So now the workers have been working, some from the 1st hour of the day, some just coming in the 11th hour of the day. And it gets to pay time, and this is what happens from verse 9 to 15. So this is Matthew 20, verse 9 to 15. It says this. And when those came who were hired about the 11th hour, they each received a denarius. But when the first came, they supposed that they would receive more, and they likewise received each a denarius. So the 11th hour guys get paid, I don't know, let's call a denarius 100 rand, right? So the 11th hour guys get 100 rand. So the 1st hour guys come along and they're like, hey, time for us to get paid. And they also get 100 rand. And when they received it, they complained against the landowner. These are the 1st hour guys, saying, these last men have worked only 1 hour, and you made them equal to us who have borne the burden and the heat of the day. But he answered one of them and said, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go your way. I wish to give to this last man the same as to you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own things? Or is your eye evil because I am good? Can anyone relate to the 1st hour workers? I put in all the effort. I've worked, I've borne the burden, I've worked in the heat of the day, and the guys that came in at the 11th hour get the same as me. They get the glory along with me. They get the credit the same as I do. Anyone relate to that, or is that only me? And yet, we can sometimes be like those 1st hour workers. God, it's not fair. That's really not fair. I've done this longer. I've done this better. I've done this harder. I deserve more than that person there. And yet those first hour workers had agreed to work for a denarius. It wasn't like the landowner suddenly cheated them out of what he'd promised. That's what they'd agreed to work for. You see, I think sometimes what we forget is you and I are not the first hour workers. We're not. We're not the third hour, we're not the sixth hour, we're not the ninth hour workers. You and I are the 11th hour workers. We are the guys that sometimes come late to the party. We are the guys that are getting more than our fair share from the kingdom of God. Yet sometimes we look at it and we go, but I've done this longer, I've done this better, I deserve more than this isn't fair. And God's going, actually, this is my gift to give out. And I will give it out as I wish and as I see fit. What if God really was fair? I think we would have a very hard time. Wayne Stiles says this: when God is unfair, consider how his grace has taken away the justice we deserve. If God were a truly fair God, in the sense that we as humans are, we would deserve nothing. Nothing at all from him. We would get nothing. Because we're those 11th hour workers who actually didn't do much to deserve it. Imagine Christ going to the cross went, no, this is unfair. Why should I be crucified? I didn't do anything wrong. This isn't on me. This isn't my burden to bear. This isn't my pain to suffer. No, God, this is totally unfair. I'm sorry. I'm calling it now, Lord. I'm walking away. Imagine that had been his attitude. Would it have been right? Perhaps by human standards, yes. But you see, God is a God that's not fair. He's just. And because he's just, he knows that there is a punishment for sin that cannot be overlooked. His justice isn't just going, oh, don't worry about it, we'll forget about that punishment. His justice is saying, this has happened, there is sin in the world, and it deserves punishment. But his grace says, I'll take that punishment for you. And that's what he has done. Thank goodness God is not fair, or else that punishment would be ours to bear. You see, God is a just God, and it means that he cannot overlook what we've done, but he does use his grace to bring us into right standing with him. And so the next time we are looking at situations and we are doubting, I want us to remember how we've already benefited from a gift that wasn't necessarily ours or due to us or fair to us. There was a video I was going to try and show. It's my fault it wasn't ready on time. But there's an Alan Gray advert. Has anyone seen the one where there's a little boy who's working and he's like building bricks or something, and the guy that he's helping gives him a bit of money, and his father calls him over and takes some of the money? Have you seen that ad? Anyone? And he keeps doing that, like right throughout his life. As the little boy as he grows into a man, you can kind of see him being like, every time the father calls something of him, you can kind of see his face, like, really? And as he gets older, here's a promotion, and here's a this, and here's a that, and he keeps taking. And I suppose the little boy, like many of us, would go, that's really not fair. Like, I've worked hard for that. And yet at the very end of the advert, he gets a phone call, and his father has passed away, and he himself is now an old man. And as he goes to where the lawyer is, the lawyer hands him a book. And in that book is written every single thing that the father had ever asked of him. Everything that he might have felt was unfairly taken or unfairly given. It's part of the whole Alan Gray investment idea, as in the father never spent that. He used it for the benefit of his son, and he got that all back in the end. That's how it is with us in the kingdom of God. Those situations where we might feel like there's doubt, where we might go, it doesn't make sense, this doesn't seem fair, God is still in control. And every single moment, good or bad, is part of the story of God in our lives. And we need to keep that in perspective. I don't know what you're going through this morning. I don't know what questions you have. I don't know what doubts you have. I don't know if if you don't have any, that's cool too. But that doesn't mean there won't come a time when you do. And in those moments, I pray that we would keep the perspective that God always has been, he always will be, and he currently is in control. And he